Kia ora tātou nei a whiana te kaupapa o te rā, ko te tikanga o te Māori, ko te mihi atu me te mihi mai. Heo anō ko tēnei te mihi aroha kia koutou katoa tēnei au. Bernardo's me VFTN or Violent Free Tairāwhiti Network etu nei. Nō reira i ngā rangatira i ngā hō tēnā tātou katoa. Ko Waio, ko Chris Simmons, tōku ingoa. I'm the service manager for Bernardo's Tairāwhiti, and just recently been told a couple of months ago that I'm the chair of the VFTN network as well. So yeah, kia ora for that team. Yeah, so it's a privilege to stand here as part of a collective commitment to a violence-free Tairāwhiti. Our region holds a deep strength of history and connection, and with that comes shared responsibility to ensure our whānau, tamariki and communities are safe, supported and thriving. Violence has no place in our homes or in our whakapapa. The impact it leaves is generational, but so too is the healing we create when we work together as a collective. This mahi isn't easy. It takes courage, honesty and willingness to face uncomfortable truth. But every conversation, every act of support and every safe space we create makes a difference, or every safe space that you create makes that difference. Violence-free Tairāwhiti is more than just a vision. For me, it's a movement grounded in kotahitanga, manaakitanga and whanaungatanga. It's about local solutions, community leadership, and walking alongside whānau with empathy and strength. And we'll be asking you further on in the afternoon how we might get there. Let's continue to uplift each other in this kaupapa. Let's keep showing up, speaking out and standing together, because every person deserves a life free from violence. Ngā mi nui kia koutou katoa, for the work that you do, the aroha you bring, and the change you create to help. Kia ora. Next person coming up is the fantastic Mr. Tim Marshall from Tairāwhiti Men's Centre.
Kia ora tātou I tautoko ngā mihi kumiha. Tēnei rā tāhua, mō te kaupapa whakahirihia. He mihi kataka ki a koutou, ngā mana wahine, ka ki nā turu o turuma, he tohu tērā, ka muhi o tātou no koutou, e kawea mai te kaupapa. Mō ngā wā katoa. Ngāti tūreiti mātou ngāi tāne, ki te awhi, ki te tautoko ki a koutou I tēnei kaupapa. I te kau whai whakaro ki ngā mate kua hinga ku whitirangi tia. E tehi au rātou I pāna ki tēnei kaupapa. Ngā rangatira whāra ki hia, ki te whakatū o te kaupapa, Dr. Peck mā, Patricia Mulpoi mā, me hoki Diane, Shannon Martinga, me I te wiki kua hipa si hoirara no te whānau o the Women's Refuge. Me ngā whānau e hinga mai mō ngā mahi tūkino o te wanginu te whānau o te Tairāwhiti, nō reira mai rātou. Huri no kia tātou katoa te ngora tēnā tātou. Kia ora whānau, nice to see you all here. Yeah, and I just wanted to acknowledge all the wahine toa in the room. I remember when we started at Tairāwhiti, and I was going to talk about this a bit later, but thinking about, I always used to feel that we were in partnership when we started Tairāwhiti with Tairāwhiti Men Against Violence, Presbyterian Support and Women's Refuge, and I always used to think that the Women's Refuge used to treat us like we just fell off the last bus. And I was thinking, yeah, but we are men. And then I was thinking, yeah, but that doesn't mean you know anything. And then I realised that, Women's Refuge movement started in the 70s. And the men's non-violence movement started in the mid to late 80s. And here we were starting a men's centre, trying to carry on the work of Men for Change in the 2010s. So, you know, no wonder they probably thought, hey, you fellas are a bit late to the party. But as we know, we were just trying to start something that, gave our weight and our support to the kaupapa alongside that. And I just think the room and most of the community meetings we go to in this space is reflective of that our wahine toa still carry the weight of this mahi in the kaupapa. So, sorry, I just remembered that I've got to click the button to move the screen. But it's really nice to be here to celebrate Violence Free Tairāwhiti. I don't know when that video was made, but this is a T-shirt from it, and I just wanted to let everybody know that I've returned to be able to fit into it after maybe about 15 years, and that's my biggest achievement of the day. So that's why I didn't eat too much lunch as well. But yeah, we're just going to sort of, I suppose, take a trip down memory lane. So our understanding, and there's a little bit of, I wouldn't say on purpose mistakes in our timeline later on, but in the essence of Manaki's Tairāwhiti collective understand, from our powers combined, we'll say, no, it was this year, and no, it was that year. But our understanding is, one of the earlier networks in the country was the Hamilton Abuse Intervention Project, HAPE, and our local community here, and we think Dr. Pat and others, and Patricia and those ones, in around the mid-90s. If you Google it, it says 1994, so it means we turned 31 today, but we're saying it's 95, so we turned 30, because that's what it also says on the cake there. So they said, hey, we need to do something here, and as we know, sadly, for all the sunshine, for all the champions, for all the awesome people we have and the awesome things of Tairāwhiti, we also lead in some negative statistics, and family violence is one of those. And so we need it's a collective effort and collective response to address that. So those people back in those days said, hey, we need to come together. And this was all voluntary. There was no funding back then. Funding didn't come along for another 10 years. But just a like-minded group of motivated people to say, hey, we need to get together and work together in the response to this kaupapa for the benefits of our whānau. And that was established, Tairāwhiti Abuse Intervention Network, and we'll talk a bit about that name a bit later, because Tairāwhiti Abuse Intervention Network kind of comes with a bit of a message about what that network's about. And that's what it was. And so there's been some chair people over the years, and you'll see some beautiful faces and some other faces there. And as I was mentioned before, a lovely Di in the middle who chaired the network up until we were passing. So, but it's a real pleasure because we have a couple of the OGs from back in those days, and I think they might be on the next slide. Here they are. The key people with a shared vision. The first chairperson, not the first chairperson, he corrected me on that. He said he came in 1999, and such as the man he is, he was instantly elected onto the chairperson, and then drove the network for, I think, probably the next 10 years. That's Chris Bunyan. I think for those of us who've been in the space, I'm not sure if this is correct, but the police, assign people portfolios, and back then I think Chris might have been assigned a family violence type of portfolio. But just being assigned the portfolio doesn't mean that you're going to grow a kaupapa. And I think it's testimony to the man that Chris is, and the dedication and commitment and motivation is that he grew that kaupapa far beyond probably the scope of the portfolio has been given by police. So we've invited Chris and Kerry along to say a few words about those early days. So I'll just pass over to Chris now. If that's okay, yeah.
Mike.
Oh, no,
Sorry, I can hide behind that.
Hide.
Kia ora, everyone. When Tim phoned me to come and speak to this, I must admit I was quite apprehensive. The nerves started tingling. They're still tingling, but I had to realise that I would be in front of a group of people that have the same hearts and passion that I did and we did back then. And firstly, I want to acknowledge all of you for the work you do in the roles that you have. I think that's very important. You wouldn't be here today if you weren't actively involved to make our community better in this field. Thanks to Tim for his kind words. I was going to say a few things about prior to my time, HAPE, there was RAIN, Rotorua Abuse Intervention Network, MAIN, Manawatu Abuse Intervention Network, MasterSim were active. But I think we really have to acknowledge the key people behind this whole movement is the Women's Refuge. And Tim mentioned that back in the 70s and the work that they did. And they've driven this and they've guided us men. We've had some wonderful times together and some wonderful discussions. But the work that they've done over the years is it's amazing, and they're still doing it. It's interesting, Tane, 94, 95, if you think 95 was when the Domestic Violence Act actually came into force, so that was a really special time. Protection orders were brand new, so everybody was learning about that. So I'll take you into my time. I've made some notes. I don't have any fancy computer work things from home, so just bear with me. If I'm going on too long, Tim, tell me to sit down, because I know Kerry's got things to say. In 1999, I was a sergeant, community relations coordinator for Gisborne Police. Just briefly, I was a police officer for 34 years, and all of my time was either up the coast or in Gisborne and shared around other places in New Zealand, but I lived here, apart from Rua. So I was sergeant in charge of youth and community. I had 10 staff, and one day I got called into the boss's office. He had a box. He handed it to me. He said, "These are Pole 400s. He said, "They relate to the jobs police go to. You're now the Gisborne Police Family Violence Coordinator, and you go to this monthly meeting called Tane." Wow. At the end, I'll give you a bit of a brief rundown on some of my personal touches with family violence, but yeah, that set me back. I had a bit of learning to do there. I went to my first Tane meeting. Not as many people as in this room. They were meeting monthly, and the first 2/3 of the meeting was going around the room, people saying who they were, where they came from. After the third meeting, I realised that most of the organisations were sending different people to every meeting, so there was absolutely no consistency, and you were just wasting this time, who we are. Anyway, I got elected to chair. One of the first things I did, I went round all those organisations and I said, "You need to elect somebody to represent family violence within your organisation." And we started there to get some coordination, some people we knew, and we started working together like that. I think, just briefly, I think I chaired it through to about 2010 and 11, but anyway, that's another story. One of the first things we did then was work out who was who. And I think of it, I'll describe it like a pizza. If you think of 15 groups or more, they were slices of the pizza. We all came from different backgrounds, we all had different kaupapa, and it was trying to get something that we could all agree on. So looking at the centre of the pizza, the one thing that we could all agree on was actually looking after the victims and children of this horrible family violence, and to make those who actually perpetrated those events responsible for their acts. The next part was the bits of pizza. It was learning what those different pieces could actually contribute to the centre. And we found out it was very interesting. Some of the groups that were really, really committed, by the time they had paid their rent, paid a support worker and a couple of staff, they virtually had no more money. So they couldn't receive any referrals, but they had the heart and the passion to be involved. Across the sector that we were working with, we identified the key parties that could potentially assist with referrals from the main groups. Those main groups obviously were police and women's refuge. At that stage, in the early 2000s, was the advent of FAVERS, Family Violence Interagency Response System, and it was governed basically out of Wellington. The key groups were women's refuge, police and victim support. Tairāwhiti being what it was and what we were developing, we came up with an MOU and we signed a few extra groups in. What you have to realise that the privacy was a key thing, and when you sit down with a group of people, you have to have trust, you have to know that people are there for the right reason, and so we were building that trust and confidence in the people we were working with, and that was really key to making this thing move forward. Gee, I'm on to my second page. So the interagency collaboration, we formed MOUs to sign with other key partners who could actually receive referrals and help. We didn't want to exclude those other groups that wanted to be a part of this thing, so that's where we formed the Tairāwhiti management group, and they oversaw the Tairāwhiti thing, and then we had, at that stage, we were doing weekly meetings of the events that police had gone to. We had to triage them, and we were looking at the more serious cases and what those groups that were there could contribute to making a change to those families. The other thing that was happening at that time, there was international best practice, and it was being looked at. I know some of my stuff I'm going to slant towards police, obviously, because they were key parties in this across the country, but they were looking at the family justice system in California, and they were really making some advancement. So we picked up some really good training, cycle of violence, strangulation, and then we were sharing that training with our partner agencies. Those who were interested could come along, and then after the training we could discuss it. We could look at it at a local and see how it would fit in the work that we were doing. So those were really key, I suppose, steps in the development of what we were doing. Kerry will tell you around about, we think about 2002, we received some funding, and we were able to employ a full-time coordinator for the Tairāwhiti group, which was a massive step forward. Instead of, like myself, with a handful of portfolios and staff to look after, we had someone that could look at it each day, and then police, women's refuge, victim support, they could be there on a daily basis too. So all of a sudden you're building the capability and what you're able to do. And moving forward, some of the other things that came in during this period, we had police safety orders developed So it was about the police learning how to actually use those, sharing that information, sharing the training with our partner agencies. Another part of our TAIN management group was, look, the people working in this arena don't always get it right. They might slip up somewhere along the line. Someone might have a little bit of a grizzle or a complaint. Well, those complaints came to that management group. We could effectively look at them and look at solutions and try and keep the harmony within the group and keep focused on the middle of that pizza and keep us working forward. Some other developments that came along during that period were family violence alarms, which were very useful. I remember one incident, we had a woman come back to Gisborne. She'd got herself a home. She had 2 children. She heard that her husband, who she had left, there was a protection order in place, he'd threatened to kill her, he'd gone missing from Auckland. Now this woman was about 5'2", wringing wet. She would have been about, 45 kilos. He was 6'4", 6'5". He was a big man. And with the threats, we popped the family violence alarm in her home, and I think it was in a matter of weeks that alarm was activated. Fortunately, there was a police unit in Whatapuko. Within 2 minutes they were there. They managed to arrest him on the property. He was trying to break in. She had actually snuck out and was hiding in the garden. Another really important piece of work that was happening at that time was the relocation of victims, either within New Zealand. That particular woman, her children, we relocated to Australia. The relocation wasn't done at a local basis. It was started at a local basis, and then we keyed in with the National Office of Women's Refuge and police, and they sorted out things. It was a really important piece of work. White Ribbon, I know Tim's got some really good stories about White Ribbon and the things that happened. They were amazing, really. Kerry will tell you about when she was employed. Diane Saunders, the lovely Diane, held the contract and looked after the money side of things. I'll just jump forward. The management group, as I remember it, and please forgive me if I've left anyone out, but I did write the names down somewhere. So it was Kerry Proctor, myself, Vi Perini, Diane Saunders, Tim Marshall, Leslyn Jackson, Susie Robertson. Now, those are the ones that I remember as the core group, and we worked extremely well together. And our meetings we had proper meetings, and there were tasks. You had to go away, you had to do your job, come back, and those meetings were about the overview of TAIN. It was how the interagency information sharing process was working, all those other things that I've mentioned, how they were working. So yeah, it was a lot of extra work on top of the day jobs. Getting through this, that's good. The other thing of real interest during the early, once Kerry was involved and the group was moving forward, TAIN was actually recognised as one of the best operating groups in New Zealand. And it was written about nationally, and then we were wanted. I think, Kerry, you come to Northland. We spent 3 days in Northland, Whangarei, Kaitaia, Dargaville, doing workshops with them, just trying to teach them how you could get that pizza working and some of the things that we were doing. Kerry can tell you about a national conference. a local conference that she organised. I don't know whether Kerry was involved, but I certainly spent time in the Bay of Plenty, Canterbury, Otago, and a lot of time in Hawke's Bay. And that was sharing the TAIN model, how we work, how we operate. And it was, this is one of the greatest things that I recall from my time working in this community, is how we get on, how we make stuff happen, how we actually break down barriers and work together. And when you go into some of these other areas, man, you shake your head and you think 2 or 3 groups couldn't even get on. There was a time when we had 52 groups aligned with TAIN. Nearly all of them had signed an MOU, so something was happening. It was good. Around about 2006, police formed what they called family safety teams in some of the major districts, Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch. For our district, Eastern District, Gisborne, Napier, Hastings, they appointed a family violence coordinator full-time and a detective sergeant and a detective full-time on family violence. It was the first acknowledgement from police that they needed to put that time and effort into it. Fortunately, I got the full-time job, but that meant travelling almost weekly to Hawke's Bay. Incidentally, the TAIN model was shared with Napier and Hastings, and I ended up chairing Live Hawke's Bay for a couple of years as well. So that's my journey. It was the work we did. We saved lives. We made a big difference in a lot of people's lives. But this family violence thing, it has a personal side to it as well. I remember as a policeman in Ruatoria, 1987, bashing on my back door. About 2 o'clock in the morning, I go out and there's a 9 or 10-year-old girl and Dad's killing Mum. So I chucked my uniform on down the road, about 4 doors down. I lived next door to the police station. I managed to arrest Dad, got him back to the police station. We did have an electronic typewriter by then too. But I popped him in the cells and, it's not an all-night station. You're on your own. And in those days, it was a serious assault, I had to do paperwork and then transport him to Gisborne to go to court. He's in the cells, he's yelling, screaming, swearing. I was the biggest a-hole in the world. And I started doing some paperwork, and about half an hour he was just ranting, raving, and it went quiet. And I don't know why, but I thought I'd better go and have a look at him. And he had ripped his shirt off, torn it, and done a tourniquet around his neck, and basically strangled himself in the bars, in the cell. I managed to find the key, open it, got a knife, cut him loose, and he survived. I saved his life. Fortunately, the health nurse lived next door to my home, and I said, "Can you come and check this guy out?" He survived. But that resonates with me. When I came down to Gisborne, I went into the CIB, was a detective, and unfortunately, a good portion of the homicides that we dealt with were family violence homicides, and some of the more gruesome ones. I know this will resonate deeply with Tim, but 2006, when I'd recently been appointed to my new role, I was in Wellington at the police college. They'd brought the teams together, having a bit of looking at a focus moving forward for us, and I got a phone call lunchtime. About 6:30 that morning, there was a woman living in Temple Street, just opposite Mitre 10. She'd left her partner, had her children with her. He was living in Mahia. There was a protection order in place. And at about 6:30 in the morning, he turned up, knocked on the door, she came out, he shot her, he shot himself. Fortunately, she survived, he didn't. About 3 hours later, the same day, staff were called to an event in, I think, Buchanan Street. The staff that attended, two of them knew the guy really well. I think they'd played rugby with him, maybe gone to school with him. When they arrived at the address, they could see him through the window, had his partner in a headlock, had a knife in his hand. He pulled the curtains. By the time they broke into the house, she was dead and he had put the knife into his heart. They both died. That's one day. 5 weeks later, in Ferguson Drive, there was a couple who had a separation. There was no knowledge of any violence or any history of any violence. And about early one evening in November, the male drove into town, drove into the address, the woman came out, he shot her and shot himself. And here we were, pulling our hair out. What have we done wrong? What more can we do? You know, and we had to sit there and think, these things happen. And as much as we do our best to try and prevent these things from happening, sadly, they still happen. Just in closing, a couple of reasonably nice things. I was in Grey Street, been to the video shop, I think. That's a while ago, isn't it? And a woman came up to me as I came out and she said, "Oh, you're Mr. Bunyan, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "You probably won't remember me." I said, "No, I don't. Sorry." She said, "Look, I just want you to know that I left him." I said, "Oh, what do you mean?" She said, "It was 7 years ago. I remember what you told me. You don't have to live like this. You don't have to put up with this. There is a life for you and your children outside of this." She said, "I never forgot that." She said, "I finally left him. Thank you." So it was a pat on the back. The lady who moved to Australia with her children, probably about 2018, I got a call. I was sitting upstairs in the police station. "You've got a visitor. There's a young lady to see you." And it was the daughter. She was about 19 years old. She had a bunch of flowers, box of chocolates, and she had a lovely letter from Mum just saying thank you. She had a new partner. She had a new life in Australia. The kids had done well, and the daughter, she was going to connect with her father, but she was home. And again, you just go, wow, thank you. Just to finalise, yes, we have saved lives and we've made a difference in people's lives. And all of the people that have been involved have done wonderful work. Thank you.
He said he stopped shaking. Now I think all the rest of us are. I think one of the things that reminds us is that for those of us who sit around those tables, who get the list every morning and that sort of thing, we see the written up versions. On now it's a 5F, gone from a Pole 400. I don't know if it's had other versions, it probably has. But it's just probably a reminder, I suppose, at the sharp end of that is, you know, the police and their work they attend in the moment when it's happening and deal with those extreme events. And I think, you know, I remember, you know, I don't know how many of those I've read, but you read it and you can read it, but you don't really get the true sense unless you were there at the time when, you know, in the middle of the night and that sort of thing and dealing with those things. So just want to acknowledge you, Chris, and your colleagues in the police for being the front face of that. And of course, often the next face of that, and as Chris has alluded to, has been Women's Refuge. And as the chair of Women's Refuge for as long as I can remember, a wahine toa in her own right, and being the first paid coordinator to sort of really, I suppose, bring the structure and solidify that whole case management operation that was started back in those days. And the other part of her life, you may or may not know, her and her husband, Matu Ian, established a little kura in the back of their house about 33 odd years ago. It's now Ngauri o Māui. My mokopuna goes there. He was at Kapahaka on the stage this morning, that's why I whipped away and missed part of it. But had the foresight, the commitment, the passion to not only bring te reo back into their whānau, but create an opportunity for hundreds of whānau across Tairāwhiti to have a pathway and that sort of thing. So I think, you know, a number of hats that she wears, she's got one on today, which is probably not representing all the power that she has. So just really awesome to have you here, Kerry. Thanks for joining us and to share a little bit about the start of the journey from your perspective. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou. Ai mihi ana ki a koutou ko tai mai nei wangani a tātou ki te hui hui nei. Ki nā wahine, nā wahine I kauei tēnei kaupapa nā mihi. Ki nā tamatāne, kei a koutou, te tāne, ka tū, kia tātou taha mō nā wahine. So I just want to acknowledge too that even though I live out at but it's Tawatapu, just before you go up the Wharerata. And I'm retired now, but it's about contributions of consequence, and that's how Tain really started. Our community was, like lots of communities, you had sites of conflict, sites of, within NGOs, competition for, you know, those things are kind of part of what we deal with. But we wanted to really think about as a community and from a really community perspective, how it is that we could contribute to ourselves collectively. And then we work with the people who had first line responders, if you like, police, and how that might affect, be more effective in the way that we could really see past the blue, see past whatever colour we wore, and really set amongst ourselves in consideration and really critical analysis of what we really needed in the Tairāwhiti. We were really lucky that Wata gave, you know, allowed, well, didn't allow, it was kind of Chris picked it up for us, that you've got to have that kind of temperament when you work with community that's quite Ngāwari, because we're quite sharp. And at that time, you know, if you knew Nanny P, you just knew that she really stood for no nonsense and lots of things. So we were really had a voice, and we were working with people like Chris. As a coordinator, it was really about thinking about if the police had communities working together on the side of their cars, what did that look like? What did that mean? And so when we thought about that as a collective and that kind of pizza-shaped pie, it was really about deconstructing perspectives and building on something that we could positively work together. We've all had experiences, whether we be in the community amongst ourselves, whānau hapu and iwi. But then we've got to have those experiences that says that we've got to set some things aside, because to progress we have to actually move forward. I was really lucky in 2002 to become the Tain coordinator. One of Chris and I's haerenga was to talk with senior leadership of police. I took the moment to ask them, what does the blue line mean in terms of family violence response in New Zealand? And it kind of took them back a bit, because I said it's really thin, and it's really, what would that look like if community stood beside you? And how would that look if we really took the opportunity to work together? So those are those critical moments that community have to respond and to be a voice within actively change. We went, actually we had no money to have a conference, but we had this international conference in Tairāwhiti. The police actually sponsored external international guests to come over. Judge Boucher was a real partner within that kind of conversation, Peter Boucher, and he had really been kind of pivotal with Tairāwhiti and having that kind of conscious raising voice, community voice response to our communities and our whānau. So the police brought in international guest speakers who kind of allowed us as a community to learn about some of the research that had been done and the response work that had been done within the US. It doesn't detract when we're people working for one purpose, just people. And you really see through the commitments, you really see to the commitment, and you really see to possibilities of change within our community. Tain was one of those responses of the time where we were really pushing through change. Not an arrogance, but an absolute critical response to how we thought, what we saw, and the possibilities of making a difference within our whānau's lives. I'm a grandma, but I put up with no nonsense around and having 5 mokopuna girls, all with very strong characters. It's about the responsibility of nan, aunties, their mothers, to raise really strong girls in a protective environment as a whānau. But a lot of our people don't have that. So the community has to be some of that response, some of that ability to be that network for them. And for lots of reasons, and if you've done as an educator, the look at the education department and how that might have happened and the look of policies in the past and how that happens where people just move away from their whenua and whānau. We have to fill that gap. So Tain allowed us really, in essence, to do things like the alarm. It was interesting. One of our wahine had a bill with a telephone company at the time, and they were refusing to put a landline in for her. So Vi and I thought, gee, we really don't have any money to fill that, because it was a substantial kind of account that she had not paid. So we thought, why don't we just take the opportunity to speak? So we rang them and said, we just need to speak to your supervisor, whoever's in charge. And we just asked them, at a death review, what would it look like if your name was shown to be the person responsible for not enabling this woman to have this alarm at the highest critical point in her life of death? What would that look like? It was really cool, because Vi and I were like, eh. She got the alarm in the same day. And it really was the confidence that we have to say to ourselves, in a moment of crisis, because I work from the police station, when we have people that can respond to us with us, that we're stronger and that our whānau are safer. I know when I was working at Refuge, we had quite a wahine with 4 tamariki, with protection order, and the tamariki were named. And Papa was on the rampage, and he knew where she was. The scariest moment for us was not that the police would arrive, because we rang them and they did, but that the tamariki had no response to that absolute chaos going on, and Dad back trying to bash into our office, trying to get to his wife and kids. It reaffirms and it recommits why we need the community to respond, why we need to have the police as our partners to respond with us. I was lucky, really lucky that Wāta allowed me to go to every morning hui that they had and work through some of the poll 400s, what was written on that and what might have been missing and what questions might be asked. Because if you work in the community, you knew this wahine had tamariki, but they were never listed on a poll 400. You knew the tamariki were there and you knew that they were being affected. So we were lucky in 2 senses of the word. Community had an input into that process, into developing a process of observation and better writing of it's not just a domestic anymore, becomes the community's response together with the police. Privileged to see ourselves reflected in lots of ways as a community. We had 52 members, but that was about each one knowing something. There were people who could see patterns happening in our community that were wrong. They saw it, they knew it was wrong. And we could discuss that. We didn't have to give the person's name, but we could talk about patterns of cyber abuse, the use of telephones, the tracking stuff that happens on phones today, the fact that I can look up my husband was looking up my bank account and he knew exactly where I was and how much I paid for things and where I was. And so that whole interesting take on how we as the community can respond, support, and look at violence in the many forms it has today. And that's the unfortunate thing, is we've now got a whole range of other things to think about. But for Tane, I was a lot younger then, geez. For Tane, it became critical for us to respond as a community. The Tairāwhiti Abuse Intervention Network wasn't just a single person, it was the community working, and the community meaning police, everybody in the community, our paediatrician at the time, the hospital staff, people working within all kinds of sectors coming together and really thinking about the response and the effects of family harm on our tamariki, our men and our women. One of the other things that we kind of realised was that our men had been suffering a lot from whakamā and trauma, that they'd been part of a community brought up with silence around their own trauma and their own abuse. And it had become something they never spoke about. And so it's great to see our men's group understand that we've got to stand up as men and take on that portion of that for us. As a refuge, we understand that that's the process of whānau to support everybody, but our men have got to work with our men and then work, because they'll be back together in most cases. So it was great to see the formation of and the men stepping up. As horrific as that event was in 2002, that they stepped up and then came forward together with the women in here. And you continue to be there. Okay, it was whānau-centric, whānau-driven, and for anyone that knows Si Hoirara, now Si just passed last week, and one of the things that I always know is that, and it kind of sits at the back of when I was working for Tane, policies and processes are great, said Si, but they should never interfere with the safety and well-being of our people. I turned up to Si's house, and she'd just been coming back from the coast, and she's got a wahine in her house. You're not supposed to have one. But this was her whanaunga, her relationship was connected, and this wahine did not want to come into refuge. So Si would, in her way, ensure the health and safety and well-being of her whanaunga. And I look at that, and I've talked a lot about how it is we can process policies, confidentiality, privacy, and still maintain human within a very, very tough environment. But you have to be. You have to sometimes take the humour. If you knew Si, she was hilarious with her stories. But Tane allowed us as a group, 52 all in all, to come together and really think about strategies of training, the international local conference, being able to have a voice across Aotearoa really, when Chris and I went, being able to talk to and be part of that senior leadership within police and what that looked like from our points of view and asking them questions, and then being able to be part of the police on a daily basis and figuring out a better way of writing, describing and or including tamariki within polls and ensuring accuracy. So Tane was all of those things, but the collectivism, the partnership, the respect. Yeah, Chris is right. We had our raru, but it was never an ego raru. We never fought, myself consciously, it was always about the centre conversation that we needed to have a good critical conversation on, and that's where that happened. So not gloves off, but a conversation into. And Tain allowed us to do that as a community. My role really was to make sure that the voices from the community were fed into the process of those first responders and how they can work with us to make our whānau safer. I got up the coast, like Chris said, we went around Aotearoa, but making sure that those perspectives, understanding that the coast is not just next door, it's our way. Glad to see that Wairoa has its own response in terms of family violence now. So it becomes that growing that natural environment under which community resistance, community collectivism and community responses are able to be heard. That makes sense to us all, really. So, yeah, just pleased to... I left to go to education, which has been really important part too about bringing people's conscious raising back into our communities as social workers and having the ability to affect change first by unpacking ourselves, our Pandora boxes, and then being able to go out safely into our community with our whānau to respond in a human way, in a whānau way, and in the most kind and loving way. So, ngā mihi kia koutou.
Ka pai ngā mihi, Kerry. Yeah, so I suppose that's where it started as the sharp end of things, like we heard from Chris, and the coordination of the management of the response. But I suppose Tain's also been a balance of intervention and prevention, so that case management approach and the community approach, and I think, there's a bit of a timeline here, and this is the collective understand exercise, so if you see anything that's not quite right up there, just let us know and we'll fix it for the next time. But as we've said, we've talked about when we started, first coordinator, 2006, when we had started the year with the international conference and finished the year losing 5 people to the sharpest end of family violence, which was, like Chris said, the irony, we can do all we can, but those things happen. It's Not Okay campaign came along about 2008. We did our own version. You'll see the lovely photos on the wall of different people in our community who were natural champions for the kaupapa in their own way, in their own space. We did some stuff around white ribbon. I'm not sure what's the next slide. We tried to break the world record actually at one stage for the biggest white ribbon. I think it was a New Zealand record. Ironically, about 2 months before, the record had been about 2,000 for a number of years, and about 2 months before, these women in Saudi Arabia, I think it was for breast cancer or something, dressed up, and they got 4,000, and so I was like, oh man. So we got about 1,200 or something, mainly made up of girls and boys high students, but with a few extra community people. And in 2014, there was a little bit of a shift in thinking about. One of the things from a community's perspective is when the coordinator sat at the police station, a lot of their time was spent processing police information and at sometimes entering the police database, which we kind of thought, well, hold on a second, police, you guys have got all the resources in the world, we don't have any resources here, and we're offering community funding for you guys to input that. But having said that, there were people in that space, and I actually ran into one of them before. So following on from Kerry, Kevin Croskery, and then joined by Jan Walker, Auditor Ho, as we said, Shannon Martinga, and most recently, and still to this day, thankfully, Wendy Miller. And along that way, particularly Auditor, he was, I think now working for Trust Tairāwhiti, but he's always been an analyst. And one of his things was that the events, the meetings would happen, back in those days was once a week. Now we have the daily meetings with the whangaia, but once a week we'd meet and we'd talk about an incident, but the following week we may or may not talk about that incident and what happened and what the outcome was, and we may or may not have tracked any pattern of what was happening, and but Auditor did a bit of that so we could analyse what's the pattern and what are the risks in this whānau, and I think that's probably the journey that whangaia has been trying to go on for the last few years and try to nail. And so there was a suggestion that as the police resource and the police commitment to this kaupapa grew, that the community aspect of Tain should really come to the fore. And that was when the conversation was to think about the prevention part of this puzzle and move to the name Violence-Free Tairāwhiti, repositioning the coordinator outside the police station and into the Bernardo's office, and then refocusing on connecting with community in that space. As you know, was it 2016? Whangaia came along. And so when that came along, I think for a lot of us at community level, one of the real pluses of Whangaia is that you had a group, an organisational and group police and community or iwi partnership which could do the second response. Because, you know, when you'd go over to those weekly meetings, I used to remember as a community partner, you'd have the police longingly looking across the table at anybody who might be able to put their hand up to take the referral, to take away and respond to the whānau. And what would often happen is that you'd cold call those whānau, you know. And the whānau, some of the first questions would be, what are you doing here? Who told you, you know, and that sort of thing, and you'd get some of those responses. So having a police iwi partnership would go, well, we were here 3 o'clock in the morning the other day, so we sort of know the story here, so it had that consistent response. And then ideally understanding and unpacking what's the real story behind it, what's the true whānau voice after the dust has settled, and what's the need of the whānau, and then who do we need to involve and build that. And that's been a journey, as we all know, as the Manaaki journey has been. I was thinking about the levers of system change. Take quite a bit of oiling, and some of them flip back on themselves, as we found in our experience. So yeah, that's where we've got to. I'm just looking at the screen, not knowing what's coming next, sorry. There's been a few other things, as we said, our campaign, looking at understanding the system. There's some work that was done a few years ago in the iwi hub, which we'll come on to shortly. And now it's really just an opportunity to reflect and look forward, and a little bit later in the afternoon think about what might be next for the network and how we might shape it. We've done that theme. Oh, there's the attempt. New Zealand record, biggest white ribbon ever in New Zealand. I'm claiming it, so anyway. And the photograph was taken, you might have seen on the video, there's a guy, Tony Robinson, and you might know him from other spaces in his life, and he got a scissor lift to take that photo. But at other times we had, and I also just want to take the time to acknowledge Jeremy, as Jeremy's now on the council, as you know. He was part of the Tairāwhiti block vote, so if you voted for him and Sam the Trap Man, you should have really also voted for Matua Ian, but anyway, we got 2 out of the 3 on the board there. But of course, as the Gisborne Herald editor, Jeremy was really supportive of the community action, the stuff that we did at Tairāwhiti, and the year before this, I think we got the schools to make a white ribbon in their fields, and Jeremy organised a helicopter to go and take aerial photos of all those kids making the human white ribbons. So there's a few lovely faces. Are in the room. And now we've got a cake here that says 30 years of Tairāwhiti, or Violence-Free Tairāwhiti, and we're just going to ask our 2 speakers, our 2 champions, our 2 legends from the early days who've just shared their early journey and the challenges, to come up and cut the cake. And we've got some things. The Herald was supposed to be here. See, Jeremy, that's what. Oh, here, there's Winsley is here, and I don't know if the photographer's here, but yes. So we'll just invite the 2 of them to come up and cut the cake. Just as before they do, I've got something we prepared earlier. Have we got flowers for them? I'll get the current chairman to present them with a koha for their time and sharing. as part of the gift, they're receiving this limited edition violence-free Tairāwhiti. Is it a keep cup is what you call these? And also a pen, violence-free Tairāwhiti. They're also on the back table. You can grab one before you leave so you can remember this epic occasion.
Thank you. Ngā mihi.
That's an awesome move.
You wear it well.
Right, and we've also got flowers for you.
Oh, is this Chris's? Either or.
Either or.
Oh, here you go. Here, I'll have this.
When you don't like them,
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have the cutting of the cake.
What's the photograph going to be?
The cake is
Oh, is it? Yeah. Front page.